Despite having only 3 main series titles, the Pikmin franchise has changed a lot over time. While the games may look similar side by side, each one has its own distinctive quirks and mechanics to stand out from the others. So whether you're a long-standing fan of the series or someone who's looking to get started with Pikmin 4, why don't you join me for a history lesson as we take a look at Pikmin through the ages. How's it going everyone, and welcome back to the loading zone, where today we're going to be talking about the evolution of Pikmin. Now I'm sure many of you tuning into this podcast are feeling the same way, but I am eagerly anticipating Pikmin 4, I am so excited for that game. So I thought, what better time to talk about the franchise as a whole, and see how things have changed over time, and perhaps what the future holds. So let's dial things right back to the beginning with Pikmin 1 on the Nintendo GameCube. This game came out all the way back in 2001, but interestingly enough, it didn't actually start life as a Pikmin game. Some of you are probably aware of this already, but what eventually went on to become Pikmin originally started off as a tech demo for the GameCube. It was called Super Mario 128, and it had like 128 Marios running around on screen, and it was really designed to showcase the power of the GameCube as a system, because back then Nintendo, they were serious competitors in terms of console power, so they wanted to put that on display. And eventually that developed into some kind of Adam and Eve concept, which then went on to become the Pikmin that we all know and love today. So Pikmin follows the story of Olimar, and really, as far as plot goes, it doesn't get any simpler than this. The guy crash lands on a planet, and he has to escape. So the way it works is that there's a 30-day time limit because the oxygen is toxic to Olimar or something, and what you gotta do is collect all of your ship parts in time within those 30 days. There's 30 to find, and this is basically what defined the formula for Pikmin going forward, where you need to collect X amount of a certain item found on the planet. So the whole idea of having this time limit is a really interesting concept. It's similar in a way to what Majora's Mask did with its 3-day cycle. It provides a really unique vibe when compared to most games, because while the atmospheres themselves, the environments you walk around in, are really relaxing, the music is super chill, that's contrasted. There's this real dichotomy with the stress of the countdown, because you really do feel the pressure, of needing to escape, and you always fear the notion that you're gonna run out of time. At first, it does seem really scary, really intimidating, but honestly, if you're not playing Pikmin for that reason, if you're putting it off, don't be too afraid, because it's really not that bad. When you break it down, when you think about it, you only have to get 1 part per day at minimum to be able to beat the game and get every part that there is, and that's not a difficult task by any stretch. And of course, to help you retrieve these parts, you've got your 3 different coloured Pikmin. You've got your reds, your blues, and your yellows. The classic 3, your primary colours. So each of these Pikmin types has a different ability. You've got your reds, which are resistant to fire attacks, and they also do 1.5 times damage compared to the other Pikmin. So really, they're your fighters, they're the ones that are going to be killing the enemies, racking up the damage, and taking out some of the bosses. Then you got the yellows, which can be thrown higher, so that means they can reach ship parts that might be on a higher ledge that the others can't get to. And I think when they were making Pikmin, they decided that this wasn't really enough to set yellows apart from the other types. They weren't useful enough. So they gave them the ability to also carry bombs, which was originally going to be universal for all 3 Pikmin types. There were files in the game found for icons of red and blue Pikmin also carrying bombs, but that obviously got scrapped because they can't do that in the final game. And I think that was a good change because it gives yellows a bit of a boost. They can use the bombs to damage enemies, to break down walls, and with the bombs they have a pretty significant role in the final fight as well. And then probably the most useful type, and my favourite type of Pikmin overall, are the blues, which are able to travel in water. And especially in Pikmin 1, this is absolutely massive, because the late game areas, you've got the perplexing pool and the distant spring. They're very water-based areas, and there's lots of ship parts that are submerged in the water, lots of enemies in the water. So when you think about it, this is probably the most balanced that the Pikmin have ever been. All 3 types have their use cases. No one type is outrageously overpowered, none of them are too underpowered either, and what's cool is that certain ship parts require you to use all 3 together. Like, there's one I think that's on a ledge, so you have to use yellow Pikmin to get it down, but then you have to use blue Pikmin to carry it across a pond, and then reds to carry it through some fire geysers, something like that. So it's really cool to use them in tandem in that way. And what makes this different from the sequel, Pikmin 2, is that there's a really big emphasis on exploring the overworld, because all of the ship parts are there. They're out in the open on the map, marked out for you to find. There's no hidden caves or anything. So that's how the entirety of Pikmin 1 pretty much plays out. And overall, for a first game in the series, I'd say they got a lot right, but there are a couple of slight rough edges, mainly the Pikmin AI. These guys are dumb in this game, man. The Pikmin are idiots. They get stuck on like everything, behind walls and little crevices, and a lot of the time they die and it doesn't feel like it's your fault. Then there's also the fact that at times it can be unusually brutal, because this was changed in all of the later entries, but the enemies didn't actually have kill caps, so this means they could kill like as many Pikmin at once as they wanted to. So if you're fighting a Wollywog and there's 50 Pikmin underneath it, you can say goodbye to those 50 Pikmin, whereas in Pikmin 2 it would be like capped at 10 or something. So enemies can be pretty scary in this game. What I think was really cool about the first game as well is that we did get to see inside Olimar's head a bit. We got to see what he was thinking, because at the end of each day he has a little diary entry where he reflects on everything that's happened in the day, and that overall just helps him to become a more relatable protagonist. It's like almost like Luigi in Luigi's Mansion. I think they had that sort of idea in the GameCube era, the early GameCube era, because with Luigi you can walk around and you can inspect any item and look at what's going through his head when he sees that. But that's enough about Pikmin 1, let's move on to the sequel, Pikmin 2. Now, Pikmin 2, it looks similar on a surface level to Pikmin 1. When you look at the graphics, when you look at the style, it's visually and aesthetically almost the same, but that's really where the similarities end. It goes in a very different direction to the first game, and yeah, altogether it's just a completely different beast. The most obvious and probably biggest difference is the fact that there's no time limit in Pikmin 2, and you might think that this makes the game less stressful, and yeah, in some ways, granted it does. You don't feel the stress of having to beat the game within a certain period of time, but in actuality, it's probably even scarier, even more terrifying than Pikmin 1. So the first way it really achieves this is with the cave system. So these are dungeons that you can find around the overworld. There's usually about 3 or 4 per level, and within these caves there's a lot of treasure, so it's worth your while going into them, but they're very claustrophobic, they're very creepy, they have lots and lots of sub-levels, so you just delve deeper and deeper, and time actually stands still here, so you can spend as long as you need in the caves, and basically you spend the majority of the game in them. Now, a lot of people weren't a fan of this and prefer Pikmin 1 to 2 for that reason, because admittedly, yeah, the caves do take away from the overworld exploration a bit, but I'm a really big fan of them personally. They're randomly generated as well, so it's a bit different every time you go in. And it's not just the caves themselves that I find interesting, but what lurks within them. Because while the enemies didn't have kill caps in Pikmin 1, the actual cast of enemies in Pikmin 2, oh man, these guys are absolute evil. They are hellspawn, man. You've got things like the fiery Bulblacks, which is a Bulborb that's basically on fire, and you can only use red Pikmin to defeat them. You've got the careening Dirigibug, which drops bombs on you, and you know, my least favourite of all, well, not necessarily least favourite, but my most feared of all, the Gatling Groink, which basically has a massive cannon that it shoots out, and it can take out a ton of your Pikmin with. And the worst thing about this guy is that when you kill him, he's not actually dead, because if you don't carry him back to the Onion in time, he'll regain his health and respawn. Yeah, it's all around not a good time when you run into one of these. But the enemies, they're really the least of your troubles when compared to the bosses. Pikmin 1 did have a few bosses. It had the Armoured Cannon Beetle, the Puffstool, the Beady Longlegs, but there are so many more in Pikmin 2. And these guys are a lot tougher. The first boss is the Empress Bulblacks, which rolls around and crushes your Pikmin. You got the Man at Legs, which has a full-on machine gun and shoots down all of your Pikmin. The Segmented Crobster, which rolls around at the speed of sound. Yeah, these guys, they're no joke. Of course, the elephant in the room is the Water Wraith, and if you're unfamiliar with this guy, be thankful for that fact. Basically, this thing, it has its own dungeon called the Submerged Castle. You can only go in there with blue Pikmin, and you'll just be going about your business, collecting treasure as normal. You'll be fine. There'll be a few enemies lurking around, but if you spend too long on one floor, this dude, he just drops in out of nowhere. The music turns all frantic, and he starts just like rolling around the different corridors, and if your Pikmin so much as touch those rollers, they're gone. They're dead. And I think just the creepiest thing about this guy, it's like Fear of the Unknown almost, because you don't know where he's come from. What is the lore of the Water Wraith? He's not really an organic creature like the Bulborbs or other enemies you run into, so that just adds to that air of mystery that he has. But the most satisfying thing is when you get to the end of the dungeon, you can convert some of your blues to purple Pikmin and absolutely destroy that guy, man. That is honestly incredible. I'll probably make a video about the Submerged Castle at some point, and a Pikmin 2 review as well, but that's a story for another day. So it's pretty clear from all of this that Pikmin 2 has a lot more going on than Pikmin 1, and to help you manage this, you actually have two captains to control. You've got Olimar and Louis, and this adds an element of multitasking to the game and allows you to be a lot more productive. You can do things in two areas of the map at once, like for example you can have one of your captains at base camp farming your Pikmin, growing the Pikmin numbers. You can have one guy going off to collect treasures, or maybe to get berries, which are converted to juice, which can power up your Pikmin. There's a lot of versatility there, and it gives you a lot of scope. It lets you get through the game a lot quicker than if you only had one. It's also incorporated really cleverly into some of the bosses as well. Like, I think it's... I've forgotten what it's called. The Ranging Bloister, maybe? Who walks towards the nearest captain. So you can lure him in with one captain, and then the other captain can have all of your Pikmin, and then you can use them to defeat him while he's distracted. It's pretty cool. And speaking of the Pikmin, this game actually introduced 2 new types, or, well, technically 3 new types, for a total of 5 or 6, depending on whether you count the Bulbmin. So I guess first, one thing that was changed from the previous cast, you had the yellow Pikmin. They were given a bit more utility in Pikmin 2, because here they introduced a new hazard, which was electricity, and for most Pikmin, this is instant death. Like, not like the fire or the water where you get a chance to whistle them back, just death. But yellows are immune to this, and they can break down electric barriers, take out enemies with the electricity element. They do lose the ability to carry bombs. Bombs were just turned into a hazard in this game, essentially. But overall, this is a good change, and makes yellows a lot more handy to have around, gives you more reason to carry them. So the 2 main new types are the white Pikmin and the purple Pikmin. Now let's start with the less controversial of the 2, with the whites. So these are pretty much unanimously considered to be a good addition to the game. They can resist poison, which is a new hazard, and acts basically like fire, so it's not instant death, but you gotta whistle your Pikmin back or they'll die. They also have, I don't know whether it's X-ray vision, what the game specifically says, but it lets them see underground and dig up items that are beneath the surface. And they can also run a lot faster than the other types, and, you know, it's cool to have a Pikmin type that can keep up with Olimar for once, you know? So yeah, white Pikmin, they're useful, but they're not broken. And the same cannot be said for the purples, which are a lot more polarizing in the Pikmin community, because of simply how overpowered they are. So let's run down their abilities here. They're a lot heavier than the other Pikmin, so they count for 10 Pikmin's worth of weight, but they can also carry 10 times more than normal Pikmin, so they're heavier, but they're stronger. Where things get complicated is how they're used in combat though, because purple Pikmin stun enemies when you throw them, and they do a significant amount of damage. So you can get 10, 20 purple Pikmin and just spam them at an enemy, lob them over and over again, and they'll get stun locked. They can't do anything. So even for bosses, you know, you've got what was once the final boss of Pikmin 1, no longer the final boss of Pikmin 2, Emperor Bulblax. You can just cheese this guy with purple Pikmin alone and defeat him in seconds. His whole intro of him getting out of the ground takes longer than it actually does to defeat him, and that's just the funniest thing. So yeah, purple Pikmin, they were undoubtedly the strongest type and kind of took away from what red Pikmin had with their 1.5 times damage in a way. They are, however, necessary to collect certain treasures, and that's the main collectible of Pikmin 2. The story is that the company Olimar works for has gone into debt, and he needs to go back to the planet to make some more money, and these so-called treasures that he finds on the planet are like just everyday human objects, which have some sort of monetary worth for some reason, and the funny part is that a lot of them are branded, so there's a lot of product placement in the game. You've got some Duracell batteries, Skippy peanut butter. It's kind of surreal to see them in the game. And when you collect each treasure, Olimar actually gives a name to it, and some of these are hilarious. Like, you find the head of a rubber duck, and I think he calls it something like the paradoxical enigma. Oh man. You also get to see what he thinks of each item and what he thinks its purpose is in the treasure logs. And this was one of my favourite parts of Pikmin 2, and I used to spend hours scrolling through these. You've got information about every single treasure, and not only that, but there's also the Piklopedia, which has facts about every single enemy. You can throw pick carrots at them to see how they react to Pikmin, see their normal behaviour. And what I find funny is that Olimar gives you actual facts about the enemies, and then Louis, the other captain, gives you recipes on how to cook them. Oh man. And while we're on the subject of Louis, when you pay off the whole debt, there's actually a fake out ending. So you think the game's over, you think it's all good, but then you realise that you've left Louis behind. You could just say, screw you Louis, and end the game there, but there's so much left to play, and, you know, I would definitely recommend beating the whole of Pikmin 2 if you haven't gone around to it yet, man. It has gotta be my favourite game in the series. So far, that is. We'll see if Pikmin 4 changes that. So now we move on to Pikmin 3, which was sort of a revival of the series, you know, a brand new entry after so long, and, you know, I say that, but it's actually been longer from Pikmin 3 to Pikmin 4 than the wait was between Pikmin 2 and Pikmin 3, and that just blows my mind. But the third game was sort of a fresh start for the franchise after so long, and it was a fresh start in many ways, with one of those ways being the set of captains. Here we had a brand new set of characters, those being Alf, Brittany, and Charlie, and these guys have a lot of personality. You know, you see them interact a lot, and they're super cute. A lot of the dynamic between Olimar and Louis, say, was implied in cutscenes or talked about by the spaceship, but Pikmin 3 does a really good job of fleshing out the different captains, and speaking of which, you control all three at once. So of course they decided to one-up Pikmin 2, and the idea of having three captains does seem like it would be overwhelming. But what makes things a lot easier is that you can set them on autopilot, have them going towards certain places, towards certain destinations, and that just makes life so much easier. And what helps with this is that the Pikmin are a lot less stupid in this game as well. So I think they're a lot less likely to just walk into trouble when they're with you or with another captain if the other captain is on autopilot. So it's just so relieving when compared to the earlier games, not having to worry about Pikmin dying because of their mistakes instead of your mistakes. What's also changed from Pikmin 2, and has sort of reverted back to the style of Pikmin 1 in a way, is the idea of a time constraint. So here the limiting factor is your food, which sustains you and stops you from starving. You have these fruit canisters, and each canister represents, I believe, is it 1 day or half a day? I'd like to say each canister is a day, and this, I think it's really genius in a way, ties in with the collectible item of this game. So in Pikmin 1, you had the ship parts, Pikmin 2, you had the treasures, and in 3, you find fruit in the overworld, and this fruit that you collect is converted into fruit juice, and that extends your time limit. So the more you explore, the more fruit you find, the more time you can spend on the planet. And yeah, it never gets to a point where you feel like you're gonna run out of fruit. You always have enough. Apart from one instance where Louis from the second game actually comes back, and he steals all of your fruit, runs off, and there's actually a beautiful cutscene. It's like peak comedy. He runs off screen, and then you just hear a massive explosion happening 2 seconds later. It's glorious. But what happens is that he gets captured by a boss called the Scornet Maestro. Now, the bosses in Pikmin 3, well, they're not as strong as the ones in 2. They did a great job with making them feel really imposing, even if they're not necessarily as deadly. So the Scornet Maestro, as I mentioned before, I think it's just such a cool concept for a boss. It's this big queen bee commanding an army of smaller bees, and it's got a whole musical theme. Well, it's a pretty tame fight. You'll get through it pretty easily if you have winged Pikmin. It's a very creative idea. Then there's the Quaggled Myoclops as well, man. You're just walking over this bit of land, it's like a nice little garden, and then out of nowhere this big, giant rock monster comes up from the ground. It is, like I said, super intimidating just to look at. The scale of these bosses, the sheer spectacle of them it dwarfs the ones in the first and second games, honestly. And of course, to help you fight these bosses, the game introduced 2 new Pikmin types. As I mentioned, you've got the winged Pikmin, and there's also the rock Pikmin. So the rock Pikmin are used to break crystals, they can't be crushed, and they can also roll down slopes, which is really cute, honestly. They were sort of the replacement for the purple Pikmins, which didn't return for the main story in this game. And I'm a big fan of the rocks, they're cool. Then you've got the wing Pikmin, which, yeah, they're very useful, you know, they can fly around, they can attack airborne enemies like Scornets, they can pick up treasure on higher ground, but there's a bit of an issue there, and it's where the controversy sort of comes in. One could argue that the ability to fly renders the fact that the yellow Pikmin can be thrown higher less useful. And then they can also fly over water as well, so the utility of blue Pikmin suffers a lot as well, because even if a treasure's on the surface of the water, winged Pikmin can still pick it up and carry it back to the ship. The only use of the blue Pikmin is picking up fruits that are completely submerged underwater, or fighting enemies that are underwater. So it's very limited, which is unfortunate, and the weird part is that you get the blues later into the game, whereas you get the winged Pikmin super early. So the poor blues kinda got the short end of the stick in Pikmin 3, and I'm hoping this changes in Pikmin 4. And speaking of which, actually wait, before we get onto Pikmin 4, I should probably talk about Hey Pikmin just briefly. I haven't played it myself, but this was a spin-off that came between 3 and 4 to sort of tide us over, and from what people say, it's not great as a Pikmin game, but as a standalone 2D platformer, it's serviceable. Apparently it performs better on the new 3DS models than the vanilla ones, so I've probably got to get my hands on one of those at some point, but yeah, for now, I'll just have to wait. I'll just have to hold off and instead focus on what's to come, which is Pikmin 4, releasing in July of this year. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, Pikmin 4 is actually happening. I can't believe I'm saying this, and I'm sure most of you watching this are pumped for it as I am. And what's got me the most excited about this game is the fact that it appears to be more akin to Pikmin 2 than how Pikmin 3 was. Because I consider Pikmin 3 to be more of a sequel of 1, but 4 looks more inspired by 2, sort of like a fusion between Pikmin 2 and Pikmin 3, because you've got the reintroduction of caves, some of the bosses like Empress Bullblacks, you've got purples and whites coming back into the main story. So yeah, suffice it to say, I'm looking forward to this one, and if those elements from Pikmin 2 do turn out to be a more heavy focus in this one, then it could well become my favourite in the series. There's some new stuff as well that they've also added, like the ice Pikmin, which can freeze water and enemies, you've got the dog, which can cross water, and again, this does put the usefulness of blue Pikmin into question, and I'm really hoping that they give blue Pikmin something new, or put them earlier in the game, so there's more of a reason to have them and to build up an army of them. I really don't want them to get shafted again, but I have faith, you know, that Nintendo will pull through here, because Pikmin 4 has been in development for a long time now, and I'm sure they'd have found a way to reincorporate blue Pikmin into the squad a bit more. It's really just a waiting game now as the release draws nearer and nearer. So that's pretty much all we've got time for today on the Loading Zone podcast, so thank you guys very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. Be sure to let me know how you feel about the changes throughout the Pikmin series as time has gone on, what your thoughts are on Pikmin 4, and with all that said, I will hopefully see you next time.